Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the workshop on negotiating a job offer. My name is Sarah. I just wanted to briefly cover some reminders real quick, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. So the first is that applications for this position are open. They close next Friday, I believe, or next Sunday at 11:59 p.m. If you're a transfer student and you're a rising junior or senior, I highly encourage you to apply. It's a very rewarding role. You get to meet a lot of different transfer students and host all kinds of events. So if you're interested, definitely apply. And let me drop the link for the application in the chat quick. If you want to learn more about the position itself, come out to the info session I'll be hosting next Tuesday on Zoom. There we'll talk about what the position is exactly, what it entails. The counselors will be there as well to talk more about the position itself. So if you're interested in learning more about it, definitely come out to that. The last thing I wanted to mention was that all of our workshops throughout the year have been recorded and they are posted on my YouTube page, or on the TRS Position YouTube page. I'll drop the link to that in the chat. So if you ever missed one or you want to go back and review it, definitely check that out. They're all there. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll let Allison introduce herself and take over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me to join you all today. And hello, good to meet you. As Sarah said, my name is Allison Keller. I'm one of the career educators over in the Division of Career Pathways on campus. And I've worked a lot with engineering students over the years and some of your advisors and so forth as well. I will go ahead and I'm going to pull up my screen. So what I plan on focusing on today is a little bit about job offers. I especially pulled some materials about like salary negotiation, because that tends to be a commonly asked question or new thing that you may encounter. So some best practices, some tips and things to think about. At the same time, though, I do want to at the beginning say that if you have questions or if you want to, me to address something different than anything career or job related, internship related, please feel free to jump in. That's why I'm here. So I'm happy to do that. And you're welcome to either come off mute or put something in the chat, and we can be flexible to whatever your situation is and kind of what you're looking for. So I am going to pull this up and go ahead and find my present. Here we go. Okay, so to jump in, we'll talk again a little bit about offers and some best strategies, and also just like some best practices to be thinking about and talking about how you can practice or get guidance on this. Just by show of either like a reaction or hands or whatever, how many of you right now are in either the job search process or internship search process, and kind of, either going through interviews or applying for positions right now? Go ahead, if you are, put a reaction just so I have a sense of where you all are. Okay, so a couple of you, it sounds like, are, and I imagine maybe those of you that aren't will be at some point in the next year or so as well. But if you are and you want to share kind of what your experiences have been, jump in, because that's always helpful to learn from others, what's kind of going on or what kinds of things come up when you go through this process. So I think we spend a lot of time and attention talking about getting the job. We talk about writing a resume, we talk about cover letters or interviewing tips, etc. But then when you get successful and you have an offer, that's a whole nother, set of skills to learn. And again, kind of new things to understand what's appropriate, what do I do? And so, I'm going to actually skip over that one. But so in terms of assessing offers, some things to keep in mind, just overall best practices, and we'll talk more about negotiation. But I always recommend when I work with a student to keep in mind that you are interviewing that organization or that company as much as they're interviewing and wanting you. So I really encourage you and all students I work with to be thinking about, is this opportunity, whether it's an internship, a job, going to help me grow and learn or develop a skill or demonstrate a skill? What is this going to do for me? And of course, in an interview, you don't want to ask that question, right? But at the same time, I want you to always be thinking about that, because your time and where you choose to work or intern is so valuable, and you have to be selective on how you choose to spend your time. And so I want you to really be thinking of this as something like, how will I grow? How will I learn? Will this give me exposure to a certain industry? Will I get to apply a skill that I've learned a lot in the classroom into the real world? Or perhaps you'd be able to network and start, that process. So no matter where you are, that it's skills or what you might gain could look different. But I want to make sure that you are gaining and that you are being discriminating in what you'd want to take, and not just feeling desperate of, I need to get any internship. Because I can tell you, even sometimes like big name companies can have internships that aren't great. And so you want to make sure what will I be able to do? What will I be able to learn? And how can I grow in this process? And one way to do that, and we'll talk more about negotiation too, but one way is to also, if they're not giving you a lot of information, to ask questions and ask good questions as part of the process. Now, that probably isn't the first thing you do. You can do that somewhat in networking, but when you're interviewing, they're always going to ask you, what questions do you have for us? And while I do encourage you to stay positive, and of course you're interviewing and you're marketing yourself, it's good to ask questions about, what's the training like, or what's the professional development resources you'd have access to, or anything about outcomes. How would you be able to contribute to a major project? What would the impact that past interns have had in that department or in that organization? And those also show that you're really thinking about this seriously too, and you want to make an impact. You want to contribute. You want to make a difference while you're there. So it can reflect highly upon you to ask those kinds of questions as well. Now, once you get to this stage of an offer, which is super exciting, when you get to that stage, the first thing I just mentioned is you do not have to have a response immediately. And so I know for a lot of students, this is your first big job offer, and some are like, yes, I'm taking it. I know I want this, or whatnot. But there's very few times I would encourage you to say yes on the spot. Of course, show your enthusiasm, thank them for the offer, ask, some of those detailed questions, or take those notes. But it's almost expected that you're going to ask for a little bit of time to process this over, think, reflect, make sure this is the right thing for you to be doing right now. So it's not a turnoff to ask for a little bit of time. It is a turnoff if you don't act excited and so forth. So you do want to thank them and have that enthusiasm. But most positions, when you're given an offer, you will have some time. You should ask for some time to think about it, and they'll expect that. So keep that in mind. If you have, as a student, I know this happens a lot. If you have many things going on at once, meaning you're interviewing or you've submitted some applications, so you're kind of juggling, communication is really important. And so it's always good to, you can always ask someone for more time, and they're expecting that you're interviewing other places. If they made you an offer, they're expecting that you're in demand. So it actually is okay to say, I'm actually in process with interviewing with another organization as well. And, ask them for more time to go through that process. It's also okay to call the other organization that you're interviewing with and let them know, hey, I have an offer. Is there any way I can expedite my process? And hey, then they know, wow, someone else wants you already. We might be able to expedite this and get you in a little faster so that you can make the best decision for yourself. Those are always, like, I know there's always nuances there, or every situation's a little different. Not everyone gets in those situations either. So I understand those are exciting and kind of novel situations, but feel free to reach out to us and walk through your situation. And we'd be happy to give you some guidance on that too. Because I know it can be kind of, delicate how you want to word things, or how you'd want to handle like talking with the other employer that maybe hasn't given you an offer yet, but ways to kind of put a little bit of pressure on them to let them know you're going to have to make a decision. And that's normal. And in the recruiting world, they're used to that. So don't feel like it's, I can't do that. It's not appropriate to do. If you're a desirable candidate, they're kind of expecting that. So just keep those things in mind. So let's dive in to some things to think about. Now, when you get an offer and you want to start to negotiate that offer, you do want to think about, when you're, let's say they give you an offer, they give you a certain, amount, that salary amount, let's say. Now, when you negotiate back, you have to kind of justify why, you'd want a certain maybe dollar amount or so forth. And so sometimes you need to really reflect upon their position description and see what you are bringing to the table in terms of your accomplishments and your experiences, in order to convince the interviewer that you are, worthy of that, of a higher amount. It's not the time to be talking about, gosh, my rent is this much and this wouldn't meet that, or even like having a certain amount in mind without any backing of where that amount came from. So you do want to be able to be evidence-based as much as possible. And I'll talk about some places where you can do research to find average salaries, but also, I'm so sorry, there's like a first responder alarm in the back. I would think about how you are going to be a value add to that organization. And these are some of those things: the skills you have, the accomplishments, the experiences, and how those align with the employer. And that could look like, I accomplished this using, XYZ skill, which, benefit that organization or will benefit you. And of course, you want it to align with the position you're applying for. So I would, when you go through this process, it's just like when you're doing an interview as well, you're going to be really doing a lot of self-reflection about what your strengths are, what you want to make sure they go away with knowing about you. But the same even happens in the negotiation period as well, when you have a job offer. So being ready to still talk about those experiences and that strengths. And this is why it makes sense for you to, earn a certain amount. So some things to think about. So for salary questions, you might get some of these questions even on the application. They might say, what's your range that you want to go for? Or what's your salary history? Well, for most of you, I imagine you don't really have a big salary history, or you've been working on campus for, so many dollars, $15 an hour, or something like that. So there's actually a lot of states now, and California is one of them, that is not allowed anymore to ask salary history, but that's not every state. Some will ask it, and again, I think for a college student, it's kind of an odd question. A lot of companies have standard application systems, and it might make more sense for them to ask a range for someone that's been in a company for 20 years and is moving over to a new role. For you, it's your entry-level position. So it's a little bit harder. If you have the ability not to put an amount, that's okay to do. As an entry-level student, that's okay to do, to put like NA or negotiable. If it's a question they ask you, here's a very generic response. But if you're not prepared to answer that, answering something like, I'm looking for a fair and equitable salary based on my skills and experience. Some people will say, I want to learn also more about this role before I would want to research what would be a fair and equitable salary. Now, where can you do some of that research? These are really important websites to be familiar with, because you do want to have a sense of what you would earn in your position. So I go to multiple sources, and payscale.com is a great one. Oh my gosh, Sarah, beautiful, beautiful cat. Oh, love it. Salary.com is another one that I use. Glassdoor is really popular too. So you don't want to rely on just one source. I think it's good to look at multiple sources, and you want to make sure you can find sources, and these do have them, where you can look at like city as well as a position title, because it's going to be really different to have a salary that's in a major metropolitan area than maybe really in a rural area, right? So you can find a lot of that kind of data out there. And so I play around with a little bit of all of them, so you kind of have that sense. Now, a lot of people talk in the terms of ranges too. So you'll get a sense of like, this is the lower end of the range, depending on how much experience you have. And this would be kind of that upper end of the range, right? So, so just to kind of keep that in mind. Now, informational interviews is listed on here because sometimes you don't want to just directly ask someone, what do you make in this role? And that's a little bit too forward. However, you can ask questions such as, I'm doing some research. I'm looking at salary.com and Glassdoor. And this wouldn't be at an interview for a job, but when you're more networking, talking with professionals in the field, you can ask, do you have a sense of what the average pay range would be for an entry-level mechanical engineer in this company or this area? And a lot of times you can they might give you more information, but I'd ask it pretty generally, and then you can see how specific they're willing to go with that. And some people are very transparent. Oh, this is what I made when I came out, and annually this is what we typically have increases at, etc. But it can be delicate, of course. So I mentioned some of this, I know, before accepting the offer. It's great to ask for time before making that decision. You don't have to accept immediately. They're almost expecting you, I think, usually to negotiate. Now, I should back up. Not always for internships. Sometimes internships are pretty set what they pay their interns, but especially for full-time jobs, there's almost that expectation. It doesn't mean they can negotiate, but it's always worth asking. There's a lot of data out there, and I'm not going to go into all of this today, but where you start out in salary is very important, because over time, everything builds on that salary, meaning if you get typically increases year over year are based on percentages. So starting off as high as you possibly can is good, because that's going to be the base number where you're going to get a percentage increase every year. And if you look at people, like bonuses are great, but usually those aren't calculated in. So that base is really important, to look at that. And certainly there's also a lot of data out there that women, students of color, etc., tend to get lower offers and don't always ask for more. And so I have a really good resource that I'm going to recommend to any of you, whether, no matter how you identify. I think there's really useful tips because it's hard to ask for more. It's hard to know our value and so forth, but you do want to push in a professional way as far as you can at the beginning, because that's the easiest time, I guess, in some ways, to get that bump at that time, because they want you there. And then everything's going to be based on that down the road, if that makes sense. Again, having open communication when you have multiple companies going on is super important. It's not like inappropriate or rude to be able to say, I am interviewing with a few other companies. That just shows that you're on top of it. You're desirable. However, when you get to the stage that I want this job, this is for me, and you make a commitment and your negotiations all work out and so forth, at that point, then you do want to stop the process with other companies. So when you sign that, yes, I'm committing to you as a candidate, even though, yes, it's at will employment, et cetera, it's definitely ethically the best practice to honor that commitment. And not keep interviewing at other places and so forth. So they would rather you ask for time and figure out what's best for you than say yes and then do something that they call reneging, meaning go back later and say, oh, actually, I'm not going to take that position. Because what happens is they let other candidates know that they're not going to get the position, et cetera. And it becomes really hard on the whole recruiting process. So I could go on and on about that, but I'll just leave it at that. This talks a little bit about that too. It talks a little bit about how it does impact, even it can impact you as a professional, because recruiting is kind of a small world of people, but it also could impact UCI. I'll tell you that this was several years ago now, but we did have a very large name company that you'd all be super familiar with. You're probably using right now on your phones and computers, that we had a large number of graduate students renege. They committed and then they backed out. And that company did not come back to you. So we had to rebuild that relationship and say that we were going to add in slides like this to our workshops, so they would come back and recruit at UCI. And they are back now. This was years ago. But we did work with them a lot to be we will do our best to educate students that you don't want to renege on an experience. Okay, so I do want to talk, I know we're talking about money when we're talking about negotiating and offers, but there's a lot more to a position offer than just money. So just keep that in mind. I know you're all young and this could be the first position. There are a lot of details that come with a job offer, depending on where you get that offer. So things such as medical and dental benefits, which those can be super important to you, even if you don't, you're not an active user yet, or vision insurance and things like that. Those are huge in terms of if your employer is paying a large percentage of those. And I will say, every employer, it varies how much they are paying for that and how much you would be paying for that. So a lot of times you get a selection where you choose a medical plan that you would participate in. Even I'll give you an example, at UCI, which is a very large organization, right? So all the UCs. So things sometimes vision's lumped in with medical. For us, it's separate, but vision is covered at 100%. But something like medical, we choose which plan. If you want all these terms like PPOs, or if you want an HMO, if you want Kaiser, and they all have different amounts that you pay monthly. However, that amount is a fraction of the cost of the actual amount that the university is paying in. So that's part of almost your, I don't want to say it's not part of your salary, but it's part of a benefit of working there, is that they're paying in so that you will have access if you would need to use all the medical and dental and all of those kinds of things. some might not start on day one of your employment too. So if you are in a situation where it's essential, you have like medical coverage right away or whatnot, you could ask those questions, because sometimes they have almost like a probationary period and it starts 3 months into your employment. So, always you can ask to talk with someone in human resources or look it up if they publish it publicly on their website, like what their process is. And I know when I was like probably most of your age, like I felt like, doesn't matter. As you get older, those things start to matter more and more. And so those are important things to look into. Vacation and sick time, it can vary a lot by organization, I will say. And sometimes they'll put those together and that they give you an amount of time, and then it can be used for whatever you want. It can be used for the sick. It can be used for vacation. They don't really care. They just know it's time off, right? Paid time off. So analyzing that. And then of course, things like retirement benefits, if it's a small like startup company, things like stock options, or if there's employer matching for your retirement benefits. And all of this is so confusing if you're not like, I know, really familiar with all the financial ins and outs of it, but they can be really important. Like you probably hear like sometimes some organizations, and I'll use an example, like sometimes in education or government, starting salaries might not be as high as some areas of like the private sector and industry sectors. However, a lot of people say, well, they make up for it because they're so large in some of their benefits. Like they might have a pension plan, or they might have really low copays for things like medical and benefits like that, or give you a lot of vacation time and things like that. So it just depends. But all of those are good things to ask questions about, maybe not to always the recruiter, but sometimes to HR. There could also be ways to negotiate some of this. So, for example, vacation and PTO kind of depends. Like at a place like UCI, you don't really negotiate that, but maybe in small organizations, you might be able to. However, certainly, I think there's been a huge uptick in people that want flexibility in their work hours, interested in telecommuting or hybrid work options. And so that's something that can certainly be negotiated early on. Sometimes, and with internships, a lot of times we see transportation being a perk. They might give you like a bus pass, or there's some kind of parking benefit to work at the organization. Sometimes you can even negotiate something like your title, if it's not the title you'd want, or if you'd want a quicker review process. So maybe they typically review people after a year, but you wanted to see if you could be reviewed in 6 months to have a potential salary increase at that point. You can also ask questions about how they're going to support you in terms of equipment. So if it's a laptop, or if it's another depending on the kind of work you do and so forth, another kind of equipment that you'd need for your work, a phone, or sometimes companies will even have like a small amount of money that will go towards your phone plan because you're going to be using your personal phone on the job, things like that. There's so much that could exist there. This wouldn't be a negotiation piece, but sometimes they'll also really highlight any kinds of like perks that they feel like they offer. Like they might have a gym membership or some kind of, kind of cooperation with the gym. I once went to an employer and I thought it was really interesting. They had a gym right near their office. And so they had free passes if the employee went there. It was something like 10 times a month or more. But if they went there less, they'd have to pay a small fee for the membership. So it was like almost like a wellness incentive. Like you had to go to get to that incentive point. They also, might have other kinds of perks depending on if it has like a tie-in, like, if you're working for an automotive company, if you're working for, a certain product or whatever, they might have discounts and things like that. And a lot of times when you get an offer, they'll try to promote those because they're trying to entice you to say yes. So you'll learn about those and they'll tell you all about what some of those benefits are. There might even be like educational benefits. So sometimes like working at a university, not necessarily UCI, but I've worked at a private university before, and they had huge benefits if you had children that were going to college, to go to that college for free, or things like that. So so there can be various kinds of perks as part of the role as well. So this is kind of an interesting thing, but thinking about when you are negotiating, this is such a high pressure kind of thing, but kind of thinking about, well, what is kind of for you, depending on how you feel about this organization, how much you want it. It may be that their first offer is as willing as as high as they'll go, for salary. And is that going to be something you would take, or would you walk away? Like, what's a deal breaker for you, and having that in mind. Now, again, you can always take that time to say, I want to think about this, but at some point you're going to need to kind of think about, I know I need to be here. And how do you figure out that number? You want to think a little bit about your budget. And I know it's going to be so much to think about after you graduate from college. And I know a lot of you are thinking about all these things already in college, but for a lot of students, it even becomes more on them with things such as, there might be student loans that come into the picture. There could be different kinds of transportation issues, depending on where your position is. So thinking about all the different kinds of things that you would need to have money for, and to budget, to think about what is it that you would need to make. Now, you can't really talk about this in your negotiation. As I said at the beginning, they don't really care, if you need that for your Netflix subscription and your Spotify and all that kind of good stuff, right? Because you're going off the students' subscriptions too, which is a bummer. Unless you're Sarah, keep that on with grad school as much as possible. But, so that's not a negotiation kind of point. So you really want to think more about experience, accomplishments, job relevancy types of things, and use that as you negotiate. When you feel like you'd be ready to accept, you kind of have a sense of that number or that line in your head. That's when you want to start the negotiation process. And so if they meet that, if they say, absolutely, we'll meet you there, they're going to be ready for you to accept. So you need to be ready for that too. So it's not a time to be like, oh, actually, I know I said I negotiated to this amount and now you met it, I'm going to ask for a little more. Like, usually that's not part of the process. It's good to talk with them, like, especially if you're looking at all those other things in addition to salary, it might be helpful to have that conversation. And be ready, if they ask you, well, why should you, earn, $5,000 more than what we gave you? And you want to be ready to say the value that you add to it. So be ready with that statement, practice that statement too. It could be an email you're sending, but it could also be on the phone. Different recruiters will want to handle that differently. And of course, throughout the whole process, you still want to show that you're interested and that you're thankful, for being considered for this offer. So that's always something like you just want to keep in the back of your mind. Even if you end up turning them down, you still want to show that gratitude. You still want to show that professionalism all the way through the process. So I want to see if there are any questions at this point. I feel like I'm talking a lot at you. Oh, I don't have my chat open. Okay, so I want to peek if there's a couple of things in here.
I had a quick question.
Please. Mm-hmm.
So sometimes in interviews, they'll say, this is what the position is offering. like this salary, are you okay with that? And that's during like during the interview.
Right.
So what if you're not okay with it, but you don't want to negotiate at that point? How do you answer that question?
Right. I mean, that's an excellent question because that does happen.
Mm.
You know, at that point during the interview, I have like the guidance that we usually give is to be a little bit evasive. I mean, because it depends on how far off the market is. Like if it's way far off where you are willing to be, sometimes that's good for you and them to know, because they don't want to keep taking you through this whole process if they're offering you way under what you'd be going for. And so sometimes I have heard of some companies being very upfront because they don't want to waste your time and they don't want to waste their time if it's like way off the mark. Now, and that's where you do want to do your homework a little bit. So you can be like, you know, I'm other positions that I've been looking at are more in this range, and, you know, whatever it happens to be. If it's not that far off the mark, I think you could be evasive. I wouldn't be, though, emphatic on being like, yes, that's fine. Now, if it is fine with you, let them know that, because I don't think this is the time they're asking you to negotiate. I think they want to know what the ballpark. And I think you could say something like, you know, I want to learn more about the role, but that would be in the range that I would consider an offer, something like that. Because then you're not saying, yes, I'm fine with it. You know, that might be the lower end of your range. Right. But you know, you try to buy a little more time before you have to put out numbers and things like that, if possible, unless it's like way off of where you'd be comfortable taking a position. Would be my best guidance, but that's super tricky. I know. Super tricky to do. And yes, someone mentioned professors. Yeah, professors are great to ask. And because professors are going to be really good about like lots of cohorts of students coming through, and they're going to ask them the questions like, oh, how much are you earning there? And so they're going to be able to you know, say kind of what other people that are exactly going through your program probably have similar experiences, what they're coming out with as well. So yes, I think professors are always good to tap into as well. Just to also just point out, I know I've mentioned you can always talk to us. So there's a lot of ways you can talk to us. So I just want you to be aware of, you can make appointments on Handshake. I know it says virtual, but we also are now starting this quarter, we started to do a combination. We have virtual, but we also have in-person career planning appointments that you can schedule. And if you want to do drop-ins without an appointment, those are in person every weekday from 11 to 2, and then on Friday from 12 to 2. So you can always come by our office if you have a quick question. And a lot of people do that with offers. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I wanted to stop by because I got this offer, and just talk it through with someone. And so we're happy to do that. It's ultimately your choice, right, on what you do, but we always could be a sounding board for you. Now, I mentioned that I have a really good resource, and this is a lot to do. So I know it's through the American Association of University Women, but it's good advice for everyone, however you identify, really good negotiation advice. And they have a lot of great statistics about the advantages of trying to negotiate early, and how there are certain identities that are better at asking for more, or that just automatically get offered more for various, you know, cultural biases that exist out there. And so there's a lot of data, as I'm sure you know, about the gender gap in salary and so forth. And it's a very real thing. And so this is probably one of the better resources that we have found to assist students in learning. They have a lot of scenarios and like language you can use, or that you can write in emails. So you might want to check out this. And I could try to put it in the chat too, if that'd be helpful. Any other questions?
One more question, I think.
Yeah.
So I know that, like, for example, if you look up like starting salary for a chemi, right, you'll get like a range of values. So coming out right out of undergrad, how do we know if we fall a little above the lower end of that range?
Right, right. I mean, it's hard. Sometimes you don't exactly know. And sometimes, I mean, I think city's important. I think Glassdoor is a great one because it actually is kind of like has actual people that write down what their salary is. Now, keep in mind, it's kind of like anything. You can overshoot a little bit too, and they don't necessarily meet that. They might say we'll meet you halfway too, or this is the highest we can offer, right? So the little bit of like, I don't know, like a Shark Tank pitch, if you watch that show at all, where they say, I want 10% for this amount of money. And they'll be like, oh, we're only going to give you, I want 20% of your company for that amount of money or whatever. And then they kind of sometimes negotiate that out. I mean, that's kind of what it's about, is doing some of that. And so, but at that stage, you just kind of want to be ready of like, what would I be comfortable, like aiming for at that point. And yeah, it is a little hard, and there'll probably be a range, of what they can even give, especially for full-time positions. Again, I don't see as much negotiation happening at the internship level, and even some entry level. They'll say, this is our entry level starting salary, it might be what it is. And certain industries have less flexibility than others. As engineers, I feel like there's more negotiation that goes on in your college than maybe in some other colleges, though. And the market's good right now too. I mean, overall. So we are hearing, more students having the ability to do some of this negotiation, but it is hard.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will say, if you're looking at anywhere public, like, it might be a state agency, a government agency, something like that. Sometimes it's buried, but certain places must publish salary information. So do a little digging if it's a public organization, because you can even like look up people's names and see what they earn and that sort of thing. And that's just helpful information to do your research with. You don't want to say, oh, I want this because so-and-so makes this, but it just is a place that you can really get a sense of, I should ask for this, seeing that a lot of their entry-level people are earning in that range or whatnot.
For sure.
Yes. But it's exciting when you get to this stage. That's for sure. I know it's a lot of work, and it just continues to be work until you get to the stage. But my biggest advice is remember your value. Don't accept right away. And sure you are gaining, as well as, of course, you're going to be contributing, but make sure you're gaining too from the experience. And when you negotiate it, make it about the value you add, and how that relates to the position as much as possible. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated your talk. It helped me out a lot. Actually, I'm in an internship right now, and I've accepted a full-time offer from that. But what I'm hearing from you very much is in line with what I did in order to get this, position. So I really appreciate what you've said.
Good. Well, congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
I think of internships are kind of the longest kind of interviews you can have. So that's awesome to get an offer. That's great. And then what to expect too. So congratulations.
Thank you. I definitely would say, I guess just to add to the presentation as well, how I got the internship was actually through a professor who kind of recommended me. So I would say connections are also a very big thing, make friends, see people that just to open up more doors for opportunity. In the case that things like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, or just applying out to companies don't work out as well, I feel like having those kind of connections are also very, very valuable.
I totally agree. I think, I mean, networking is the number one way people get jobs overall, any research or survey you see. And so it's so huge. And referrals too, like within companies, it's a very expensive process for a company to hire people. And so if they can have referrals, and it might be your faculty, it might be alumni, for example. That's why I always say, reach out on LinkedIn to alumni at organizations you want to work at, because they might be able to refer. And sometimes they even get a bonus if they hire you. So, those kinds of things are huge to do. So thank you for sharing that and your experience.
No, thank you.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much for everyone coming out. Thank you, Allison, for the talk. I agree, it was very, very helpful. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. Good luck to you all. Have a great rest of your week too.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Bye.